Lagos was alive with its usual chaos. Horns blaring, hawkers weaving between cars, and the occasional cry of a Danfo conductor shouting for passengers. On Ifeoma Street, nestled in a quieter part of Surulere, stood a house that no one dared to approach. The house was pristine, a massive structure with whitewashed walls, tall black gates, and an air of eerie perfection. But the tales surrounding it had spread far and wide, whispered in the corners of markets and on dusty roadside benches. Delivery men avoided it. Neighbors crossed the street when passing it. The house seemed normal at first glance, but those who lived near it swore it wasn't empty. They said the lights flickered on and off at odd hours, that at night, voices whispered through the walls, voices that didn't belong to anyone living. The last known occupants of the house, a family of 4, had disappeared without a trace nearly a decade ago. No belongings, no signs of struggle, just an empty house, its front door ajar as though it had swallowed them whole. For Ifeoma, a 26-year-old newcomer to Lagos, the rumors were nothing more than idle talk. She'd moved to the city from Asaba 2 months ago after securing a job as a junior designer at a prestigious fashion company. For her, Lagos was a city of endless opportunities, and Ifeoma Street, a relatively quiet middle-class neighborhood, was a step up from her small-town upbringing. The fact that she'd found a cheap apartment just a few doors away from the infamous White House was mere coincidence. The house intrigued her, though. Every morning as she walked to the bus stop, she'd glance at its imposing gates. And every evening as she returned, the house seemed to watch her back. But Ifeoma wasn't one to believe in ghosts. She had enough on her plate trying to adjust to Lagos life. Between her demanding job, long commutes, and trying to save money, she barely had time to entertain silly stories. At least, that's what she told herself. It started one night after a particularly long day at work. Her boss had called an emergency meeting that dragged until past 9 p.m. By the time she caught a kiki to Ifeoma Street, the roads were nearly deserted. The usual hum of the neighborhood, children playing, women chatting, the occasional radio blaring from an open window, was absent. Even the generator noises seemed distant, muffled by the weight of the night. Ifeoma walked briskly, her heels clicking against the uneven pavement. She kept her eyes straight ahead, but as she passed the White House, she felt it, that cold, prickling sensation on the back of her neck, as though someone was watching her. Her steps slowed, and against her better judgment, she turned to look. At one of the upstairs windows, a figure stood shrouded in shadow. It was still unmoving, its face obscured by the curtain. Her breath hitched, her feet frozen to the ground. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge her, but its presence was palpable, heavy. Suddenly, the curtain fluttered closed. When it settled, the figure was gone. Ifeoma's heart pounded. She told herself she was imagining things. Maybe it was just the play of shadows or a trick of the light. But as she hurried past the house, a faint hum reached her ears, a low, melodic sound, like someone singing a lullaby. She quickened her pace, refusing to look back. By the time she reached her apartment and bolted the door shut, her hands were trembling. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the melody replaying in her head. It was haunting, familiar in a way that made her stomach churn. The next day, Ifeoma decided to bring up the house with her neighbor, Madame Fawzat, who ran a small provision shop on the corner of the street. Madame Fawzat was in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. If anyone knew the truth about the house, it would be her. "Ah, Ifeoma, you've noticed it, haven't you?" Madame Fawzat said when Ifeoma mentioned the house. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That place is not ordinary. Nobody lives there. But it is not empty." "What do you mean?" Ifeoma asked, frowning. Madame Fawzat sighed. "The last family that lived there disappeared. Before them, there were others. Tenants who moved in and were never seen again. That house swallows people, my dear." But Ifeoma hesitated. "I saw someone. In the window, Madame Fawzat's expression darkened. "You saw them." She reached out, gripping Ifeoma's arm tightly. "Whatever you do, don't go near that house. Don't let it notice you." Ifeoma felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to brush off Madame Fawzat's warning, attributing it to old wives' tales and neighborhood gossip. Still, a seed of unease was planted in her mind. That evening, Ifeoma returned home feeling unsettled. She couldn't shake Madame Fawzat's words or the memory of the figure in the window. She resolved to avoid the house altogether. But Lagos had a way of testing people's resolve. 2 nights later, she was coming home late again, her arms full of groceries, when she noticed something odd. Outside the gates of the White House was a small package. It was wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with twine, sitting neatly on the pavement. Ifeoma hesitated. The package seemed out of place, almost too ordinary. She glanced around, but the street was deserted. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in the stillness. No one answered. Curiosity got the better of her. She set down her groceries and picked up the package. It was heavier than she expected, and the paper felt cold to the touch. There was no label, no address, no indication of where it had come from. As she stood there, holding the package, a soft whisper drifted through the air. "Bring it back." Ifeoma froze. The voice was faint but distinct, carried on the breeze like a warning. She looked around, but the street was empty. The voice came again, louder this time, more insistent. "Bring it back." Her heart raced. She dropped the package, her hands trembling. The moment it hit the ground, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing down on her like a weight. Then, without warning, the gates of the house creaked open. Ifeoma stumbled backward, her eyes wide. The air seemed to grow colder, and the shadows inside the house shifted unnaturally. She thought she saw something, glowing red eyes staring at her from the darkness, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The whisper returned, but this time it wasn't a voice. It was a growl, low and menacing, reverberating through the air like a warning. Before Ifeoma could move, the gate slammed shut with a deafening clang, and the package disappeared. Over the next few days, Ifeoma tried to convince herself it was a hallucination. Work was stressful. She was overtired, and her imagination had gotten the best of her. But the house didn't let her forget. The whispers followed her wherever she went, soft at first, then louder, more urgent. At night, she dreamed of the figure in the window, its hollow eyes staring into her soul. The melody she'd heard that first night played over and over, lulling her into a false sense of calm before turning into a piercing scream. One afternoon, unable to bear the tension any longer, Ifeoma decided to investigate. She returned to Madame Fawzat's shop and pressed her for more details about the house. "There's nothing more to say," Madame Fawzat said, her voice firm. "That place is cursed. You should stay far away." "But why is it still there?" Ifeoma demanded. "Why hasn't anyone torn it down?" Madame Fawzat hesitated, her eyes darting to the door as if she were afraid someone might overhear. Finally, she whispered, "Some things cannot be destroyed, my dear. That house, it's alive. And it wants something." "What does it want?" Madame Fawzat's expression was grim. "That is for you to find out." That night, Ifeoma couldn't sleep. Her thoughts were consumed by the house, the whispers, and the package. As she lay in bed, she felt a strange compulsion, an urge to return to the house, to confront whatever was haunting her. At midnight, she gave in. She dressed quickly and slipped out of her apartment, the cool night air prickling her skin. The street was silent as she approached the White House, its gates towering above her. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the latch before pushing it open. The gate creaked loudly, the sound echoing into the night. Ifeoma stepped inside, her breath catching as the air grew colder. The house loomed above her, its windows dark and uninviting. As she approached the front door, something glinted in the moonlight. She bent down and picked it up, a small, old-fashioned key. It was intricate, its surface etched with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. Ifeoma turned the key over in her hand, a sense of foreboding washing over her. She glanced at the door, its lock seeming to beckon her. Without thinking, she slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, empty hallway. The whispers grew louder, surrounding her, pulling her inside. Ifeoma stepped into the hallway, her eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. The house was silent, but the whispers persisted, swirling around her like a cold wind. She took a tentative step forward, the wooden floorboards creaking under her weight. As her eyes adjusted further, she noticed that the hallway was lined with old portraits. Faces stared back at her from the walls, eyes hollow, mouths frozen in silent screams. Their gazes seemed to follow her every move, making her skin crawl. She moved deeper into the house, the air growing colder with each step. The whispers seemed to guide her, leading her towards the back of the house. She followed them, her heart pounding in her chest. Eventually, she reached a large wooden door, slightly ajar. The whispers intensified, urging her to open it. With a deep breath, Ifeoma pushed the door open, revealing a hidden room bathed in an eerie blue light. Inside, the room was filled with old photographs and artifacts. Mama Ban's eyes fell on a large portrait hanging on the wall. It was a picture of Ben and Charles, but something was wrong. Their smiles were twisted, their eyes hollow and empty. As she reached out to touch the portrait, the room began to shake. The artifacts flew off the shelves, and the blue light turned into a harsh, flickering glow. Ifeoma stumbled back, clutching the key tightly. A voice echoed through the room, cold and unforgiving. "You shouldn't have come here, Ifeoma. Now you must stay." The walls closed in, and shadows swirled around her. Ifeoma felt herself being pulled into the darkness, the key slipping from her grasp. She reached out desperately, but it was too late. The last thing she saw was Madame Fawzat standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with sorrow and fear as the room vanished into nothingness.